She worked in that mansion for 5 years, not once asking for a raise. But when the billionaire's wife accused her of stealing a diamond bracelet, she lost everything. No one believed her, not even the man whose child she raised since birth. Yet months later, something happened in that same mansion. Something no one could explain. Grace had always believed that good work spoke louder than words. Each morning, long before the city woke, she boarded the early bus that climbed the narrow road toward Hillcrest Avenue. At the very top stood the Whitmore Mansion, 4 stories of marble, glass, and silence. Inside those walls, her days began before dawn and ended when the moon hung pale above the fountain. She had started as a temporary housekeeper, hired to help during Mrs. Whitmore's difficult pregnancy. But when the baby arrived, a fragile, blue-eyed boy named Oliver, Grace somehow never left. She learned the rhythm of his tiny breaths, the soft squeak of his favorite toy, the exact lullaby that could quiet him when even the night nurse failed. Within months, the mansion's rhythms revolved quietly around her. Grace was small in stature, the kind of woman people passed in hallways without noticing. Her uniform was always crisp, her hair pinned neatly beneath a simple bun. She never wore jewelry. She said metal on skin distracted the hands from honest work. The other servants whispered that she was too serious, too plain. But Grace carried her dignity the way others carried pearls, silently, without display. To Oliver, she was the world. When she entered the nursery, his eyes lit up brighter than the chandeliers downstairs. He babbled when she hummed, clutched at her apron when she turned to leave. She called him "my sunshine," a phrase that once made Mrs. Whitmore frown. After that, Grace never said it aloud again. She only mouthed it while rocking him to sleep. The Whitmores were wealthy beyond imagination. Mr. Whitmore ran a technology empire that stretched across continents. His time belonged to boardrooms and private jets. Mrs. Whitmore, born into old money, managed charities and dinner parties with equal perfection. They lived in a house full of people but devoid of warmth. Security guards at the gates, maids who never met their eyes, gardeners who spoke only when spoken to. Grace learned to move like a shadow, invisible, efficient, unthanked. Still, she smiled each time the child reached for her. His laugh made every sleepless night worth it. The day everything changed began like any other. A sky painted silver with early rain, the scent of coffee drifting through the halls. Grace arrived in the nursery just as Oliver was waking. He greeted her with a delighted squeal and a tug on her sleeve. She fed him oatmeal, wiped his tiny hands, and sang quietly while folding fresh sheets. Downstairs, preparations buzzed for Mrs. Whitmore's charity luncheon. Florists filled crystal vases. Chefs shouted orders from the kitchen. Grace stayed upstairs, away from the commotion, tidying the nursery before returning Oliver's toys to their shelves. When she finished, she checked every drawer, smoothed every pillow, habit, not obligation, and finally went to fetch clean linens from the laundry room. She was gone less than 5 minutes. When she returned, Mrs. Parry Whitmore stood in the center of the nursery, pale as the lace curtains. In her hand glittered an empty velvet box. The air crackled with accusation. "Grace," she said, voice trembling, not with fear but fury. "My diamond bracelet. Where is it?" Grace blinked, confused. "Your bracelet, ma'am." "It was right here," the woman snapped, pointing to the vanity. "I took it off while I changed Oliver's clothes. Now it's gone. You're the only one who's been here." Grace's stomach turned to ice. "Ma'am, I would never—" "Don't lie to me!" The shout carried through the corridor. Servants froze in doorways. Footsteps gathered. Within moments, Mr. Whitmore appeared, tall and severe, still holding his phone. "What's happening?" "She stole my bracelet," his wife said. "It's worth a fortune." Grace shook her head so hard her bun loosened. "Sir, I didn't take anything. You may search my things, please." He hesitated for only a second. "Do it." A guard stepped forward. Grace's hands trembled as she offered her small cloth bag. Inside were the same modest contents she brought every day: a folded apron, a Bible, a tin lunchbox, a photo of her late mother, a child's crayon drawing Oliver had given her. The guard laid them on the floor one by one. No bracelet. Still, Mrs. Whitmore's eyes blazed with certainty. "She must have hidden it somewhere. I want her gone." Grace looked to Mr. Whitmore. His gaze slid away. Pack her things, he said quietly. The words struck harder than any shout. After 5 years of service, they did not ask questions. They did not thank her. They did not even let her hold the child one last time. Within an hour, her quarters were emptied. The maids avoided her eyes as she folded her uniforms into a suitcase. The head butler, usually kind, offered no defense, only a silent nod toward the waiting car. Grace's legs felt hollow as she descended the grand staircase for the last time. Below, guests were already arriving for the luncheon, their laughter slicing through the echo of her footsteps. She tried to keep her chin up, but tears blurred the polished floors. Near the door, a sudden cry pierced the noise. Oliver. The nurse carried him in, trying to hush him, but he stretched his small arms toward Grace, sobbing uncontrollably. For a heartbeat, she hesitated, desperate to comfort him. Mrs. Whitmore intercepted her with a look sharp enough to cut glass. "Leave," she ordered. Grace swallowed hard, bent down just enough for the baby to see her face, and whispered, "It's all right, sunshine. Be good for them." Her voice cracked on the last word. Then the guards opened the heavy doors, and she stepped into the cold afternoon light. The sound of the mansion gates closing behind her echoed like a verdict. "Before we continue, I want to ask you something. If you were in Grace's shoes, fired, humiliated, and accused of something you didn't do, would you still forgive them? Tell me in the comments what you think, because what happens next in this mansion will leave everyone speechless. And if you're still watching, that means your heart's already with Grace. So please, take a moment to subscribe, tap the bell, and like this video. It's free and it helps me bring you more stories that remind us that even in a cold world, goodness still matters. Now, back to the story. The day Grace walked away from that mansion, she thought her chapter there had ended, but fate had other plans. The weeks that followed blurred into survival. Grace found a small room above a corner cafe downtown. Bare walls, a single window, but freedom enough to breathe. She worked long hours washing dishes, hands raw from soap and heat. Each night she whispered a prayer for the child she'd left behind. At the mansion, life appeared unchanged from the outside. Cars came and went. Lights glimmered in the ballroom. Yet inside, something had shifted. Oliver stopped laughing. His bright eyes dulled. His small mouth, once bubbling with babble, fell silent. Doctors examined him. Specialists tested his hearing, his throat, his mind. They found nothing wrong. "Perhaps he's just adjusting," they said. But weeks turned into months, and the silence deepened. The nurse left, claiming bad luck haunted the nursery. Even the housemaids whispered that the boy was cursed. Mrs. Whitmore blamed everyone. Her husband, the doctors, the universe, but never herself. "He was fine before that woman," she said. "Ever since she left, he's been strange." Mr. Whitmore said little. Sometimes he would stand at the nursery door, watching his son stare at the window where Grace once stood singing. In those moments, even he could feel the ghost of her presence, the warmth she carried that money couldn't buy. Back in the cafe, Grace learned to smile again, faintly. She became known for remembering every customer's name, for adding extra sugar when she sensed someone needed comfort. Yet some nights she still woke at the sound of a phantom cry, reaching for a child who wasn't there. She told herself time would dull the ache. It didn't. One evening, as she wiped tables, she heard two customers gossiping. "Did you hear? The Whitmore baby still won't speak. Poor thing. Doctors can't help." Grace's hand froze around the cloth. For a long moment she simply stood there, heart pounding. Then she whispered a prayer for him, as she always did, and forced herself to keep working. Inside the mansion, tension reached a breaking point. Mrs. Whitmore's charity friends began to notice the boy's silence. Invitations dwindled. Rumors spread. The proud woman withdrew from public view, humiliated that all her wealth couldn't fix her son. One stormy afternoon, Mr. Whitmore returned from a trip and found the house in chaos. Oliver had refused to eat for 2 days. Servants rushed with bottles and toys, but the child only sat by the window, clutching a small cloth rattle, one Grace had sewn by hand. Mr. Whitmore took the toy gently. Embroidered along its edge, almost invisible, was a single word: Grace. Something twisted inside him. For the first time, he wondered if they'd made a terrible mistake. He ordered the staff to search every room again for the missing bracelet. Though months had passed, hours later a maid screamed from upstairs. Beneath a loose floorboard in Mrs. Whitmore's dressing room, wrapped in tissue paper, lay the glittering diamond bracelet, tarnished slightly by dust, but there all along. When confronted, Mrs. Whitmore stammered, insisting she must have hidden it herself and forgotten. But her husband saw the fear flicker in her eyes and understood the truth. By then, Grace knew nothing of their discovery. She finished another long shift at the cafe, wiped the counter, and stepped outside into the rain. The streetlights blurred through falling water, and she lifted her face to the sky, letting the drops wash away another day of ache. In that same moment, miles away, the mansion that had rejected her sat in absolute silence. Oliver, pale and tired, stared at the door of his nursery. Then softly, almost imperceptibly, he formed a sound. One word. Grace! The nanny's name rolled through the air like a bell. The nurse dropped a spoon. Mrs. Whitmore gasped, hand to her mouth. Mr. Whitmore whispered, "What did he say?" The baby smiled for the first time in months. Grace! And with that single word, the entire mansion went still, as if the walls themselves remembered the woman they had cast out. Grace would learn of it days later when a car stopped outside the cafe and a familiar voice asked for her. But in that instant, between innocence and realization, between wealth and humility, the Whitmore family finally understood what they had lost. Because sometimes the purest love does not come from blood or fortune, but from the hands that serve quietly, asking for nothing in return. The world may forget the truth for a while, but it never forgets justice. Grace didn't seek revenge. She didn't have to, because sometimes life has a way of bringing every hidden thing back to light. The Whitmores learned that no mansion, no wealth, no power can silence the voice of an innocent heart forever. Tell me in the comments, do you believe karma always comes back around? And if you want to hear more stories where betrayal meets its reckoning, subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications. Your support helps us keep telling the stories that remind the world that truth may bend, but it never breaks.